Okay, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us. Thank you for tuning in to the Salesforce Admins webinar, How to Create Awesome Documentation. It's going to be 29 more minutes of amazingness, I promise it. So let's get started. Our speakers today, I am so happy to be presenting with Amber Boaz, who is Project Manager at Code Science. You can follow her on Twitter at Amber9904. My name is Mike Gerholt. I am Manager Admin Evangelism at Salesforce. You can follow me at Mike Gerholt. There could be some fun gifts during this webinar. So those are the two people you're going to hear from today. So of course it wouldn't be a Salesforce webinar without a forward-looking statement, which basically means Salesforce is a publicly traded company, so please make all of your purchasing decisions based on current features and functionality and not on any of the forward-looking features we may point out in this webinar. But before we get started, of course, we have some housekeeping to do. So I mentioned we were on Twitter. You can be on Twitter with us, so follow Salesforce Admins at Salesforce Admins. No I, or if you want to find other incredible, amazing, awesome admins out there, follow the hashtag #AwesomeAdmin. And if you're on Facebook, like the rest of the world is, Salesforce Admins is your go-to Facebook page. And YouTube, Salesforce Admins, super easy to find, amazing videos. And of course, YouTube is where this webinar will eventually end up, because just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. Yes, all of our Salesforce admin webinars are being recorded. In fact, you can tweet that using this webinar is being recorded hashtag, just to remind people that although they're missing out on the live fun right now, they can go back and watch it later. And speaking of where they can go, join us in our Salesforce Admins webinar group. This is our go-to spot, so you can ask questions and we will answer them. In fact, we have experts standing by right now to answer questions, and this can come back to later, so that way we don't lose the questions and continue the conversation. So don't wait, ask your question when it pops in your head. And of course, at the end, we will take a few questions for our live Q&A. Maybe you can try and stump Amber, I'm not sure.
All right, thanks, Mike.
You bet.
So today, we're going to talk about documentation, quite possibly the most interesting webinar ever. We're going to try to make it super interesting. All right, so we're going to talk about what is documentation. We're going to go over some best practices for documenting your org, and then I'm going to show you a snazzy wiki that is built in Google Sites that is documentation about documentation. So very, very meta today. All right, so documentation overview. What the heck is it, and why should you care? So what do we mean by documents? So according to the Google, a document is material that provides official information or evidence, or that serves as a record. Nobody quotes Webster's anymore at the beginning of a presentation, they quote Google. So documentation includes how-tos, right? How do I use this new snazzy functionality, this new expense report functionality you've built for me in Salesforce? How do I create an expense report item? How do I attach the receipt? How do I submit it for approval? What happens if it's rejected? So how-tos including screenshots and information about the progress of steps, right? You don't submit it before you've created it, that sort of thing. Training guides along those same veins, those tend to be very tightly intertwined, the how-tos and training guides. So training guide including under what circumstances would you do these steps? Not just the click here, then here, but the why of things. Why would you do one step over another? Videos are, folks don't tend to think of videos as traditionally as documentation, but they are fantastic, especially as a function of training folks. You know, first click here and then click there. Doing that with a screenshot is a little bit harder than doing that with a video. And there are a bunch of tools out there that let you create quick and dirty videos that show folks how to move through new features and functionality you've built. So those tend to be very user-focused, the folks who you've built things for. On the other side of things, kind of the more technical documentation, user stories in the agile sense, you know, as a manager, I can approve timesheets so that our records are correct, tells you a lot about the actors in a particular scenario, what they're doing and why they're doing it. So again, capturing the why is super important. And then there's also the cases that have been filed by your users. So these are the requests that have come from folks. You know, I can't approve my timesheet. Well, it's because you didn't enter enough information here or there. So making it clear why those pieces are missing, maybe even including some inline help. So making it super obvious to folks where they can interact with things. All right, so why should you do this? Why would you want to put yourself through the craziness of creating documentation? Your users need it. That's going to be your biggest audience, right? The folks who are interacting with the things you've built in Salesforce. The folks who need to day-to-day check that box, submit that approval process, fill in that form. Those are the folks who need to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it and in what order. But you're also documenting for your colleagues, right? The folks who have inputs into your system and the folks who accept data from it. So a great example of that would be an expense report type situation. If you're not tracking all of your expenses in Salesforce, and a lot of organizations are not, I submit my expense report in Salesforce and then it gets spit out to the payroll folks so that they can then reimburse me the money on my expense report. So those folks who manage that payroll system need to know how it works and need to be confident that things have been approved by the right manager so they don't have to undo that work. The other person that reads your documentation is future you. And let me explain what I mean by that. I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning. I'm sure it was lovely because I'm not hungry now, but I certainly don't remember what I did 6 months ago. I don't remember why I made the decision to build an object entirely of checkboxes. I'm sure I had a good reason, but I don't know what it is. But documentation, I can go back and look and say, oh, right, that object full of checkboxes, here was who I built that for and why I built that. I also mean future you in the scope of your successor in your job, right? So the chances that you're going to stay in that same job forever are pretty low. The job market in Salesforce land is hopping, and chances are you're going to move either up in your organization or out to another organization. Leaving your successor readable, easily consumable documentation is a huge gift. It is karmically super important. And I would argue that all awesome admins do that for their successors. So where should you store this documentation? It needs to be easily accessible. The cloud is an obvious place. If you're so inclined, storing it in Salesforce is a great way to do that as well. Putting the documentation where folks are doing the work is important. If you're giving them documentation on how to use your mobile app, a printable PDF probably isn't the best way, right? So be clear on how folks are going to interact with the documentation, interact with the functionality, and put the documentation in a place and in a format that's easily accessible for them. Okay. So what tools can you use to document? Pretty much anything. Today we're going to show off a Google site. It is a lightweight wiki. Confluence is another wiki that's built by Atlassian. And so wikis are a great way to tie your documentation together. It's not just a stream of consciousness kind of document, not linear, if you will. Screen Steps is a great application for taking screenshots, enumerating them, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3, and then giving some directions. So I highly recommend that. And then Config Workbook, we're going to talk about a little bit. It's an app exchange app that pulls metadata out of your Salesforce org in a spreadsheet. And then you can put that spreadsheet into Google Sites or keep it in a spreadsheet, whatever your preference. You'll notice here we have a big giant red circle with a slash through it across Microsoft Word. I love Microsoft Word. There is a time and a place for Microsoft Word. 65 pages of documentation is in a Word doc is not documentation. That is checking a box to say you've written stuff down. It's not easily searchable. It's not easily updatable. It's very overwhelming to folks. I don't recommend doing just one big Word doc of all your documentation. Folks will be grateful they have it, but they won't love you for doing it. Okay, so let's talk about some best practices. What are some ways to get this party started? So here are the steps in the documentation process. So step 1, you're going to plan. How are you going to do this? What format are you going to use? Who are you writing for? How are you going to disseminate the information? So making a plan about what are all the things you're going to try to accomplish. Where does it fit in your development cycle? Are you going to do it at the front end? Are you going to do it, after things are done? How are you going to planning all those details? Step 2 may be the hardest, writing. Just start. I find that if I start with an outline and then fill in the blanks as things become more solidified as they're built, that's a super useful way to do it. Just starting with a blank screen is very, very hard. It can be done, but if you can start with an outline, you're going to be better off. Revising it. So when I write, I'm well aware that I'm often, I tend to write in a very casual way, as those of you who follow me on Twitter are aware. But my users may not respond to that. That may not be useful for them. They may get distracted by it. And so revising and going through and removing some of the more colloquial language that I tend to use when I'm writing is great to do in the revise section. Also removing jargon, explaining your 3-letter acronyms, right? Being very clear as to what you're doing. It's super helpful to have someone in your target audience read the documentation before you publish it, which is step 4, which we'll get to in a second, because they can give you some feedback from your intended audience, okay? Step 4 is publish it. You gotta tell the world what you've done. Here's the documentation, here's where you find it, here's what you can do with it. You can search it, you can comment on it, you can make suggestions for improvements. So making it super clear what people can do with this documentation, where it is, and how to consume it. And arguably, step 5 is the most important. You're going to do it again. You're never done with documentation. Documentation is not something you tack on the end of a project and just hope you get to it, because you won't. It's a lot like training in that way. That time and energy tends to be used for making everything the right color or moving the buttons in a certain order. They tend not to be used for documentation. But make sure that you dedicate time to do the planning, the writing, the revising, and the publishing. Okay. All right. So we just covered a bunch of stuff, and you guys remember all of it. If I gave you a quiz, you would totally be able to pass it, right? No, I don't think so. Okay, so given that, I want to show you this snazzy wiki. Okay, folks should be able to see my screen. This is the Documentation Best Practices Wiki, and you'll notice I recommend that you document all the things. You can share this wiki with your colleagues at bit.ly/Amber-says-documentation, and that link is available right now, so you're welcome to send folks there now or click through as you like. So this wiki is built in Google Sites. If you are a Google Apps shop in your organization, meaning you use Gmail and Google Calendar, Google Sites is available to you as a free portion of that suite of products. And so this is a Google site that I've created in my Gmail. You'll notice Amber9904 Gmail, please don't spam me. This is because I'm a Gmail user, I have this available to me. I have other wikis that I use for my own personal stuff. This one just happens to be one that I built for the Dreamforce version of this same presentation. So, a couple things about this wiki. I have the ability to edit pages and create pages and change settings here. I can share this out, you guys should all have access, but you can also search. Good documentation is easily searchable. I should be able to figure out how to get where I need to get without traversing Amber's idea of how things should be organized. So search is super important. Okay, another thing you'll notice, and you guys, my admin buddies, totally understand last modified date, right? This page was last modified 46 minutes ago. And if we stay here, that will increment up to 47 minutes here shortly. So you can see how recent this page was updated, which tells you a bit about its relevancy, right? There are big chunks of this site that haven't changed since just before Dreamforce because it's still relevant. So maintaining your documentation is also super important. I want to show you just how easy it is to edit a page. So I'm going to edit this page, and I'm going to copy the link of the slides that you just saw, and we'll see further here onto the page. I'm going to highlight it and click the link. It knows to turn it into a link, and then I'm going to click Save. So for those of you who are on the site right now, if you refresh this front page, you will now have that link, and you can go look and see sneaky what's coming up after this demo is over. Don't tell Mike though, because he's very protective of his future slides. And then the recording, I'll also have it here as well as on this, but it's also going to be on the sign up page and on the YouTube channel. So yes, this webinar is being recorded. We've been over that, but it's worth noting. Here's some more information about the Dreamforce session, including the description of what we covered there. But I want to talk about what's going on here on the left-hand side. So this is basically more detail about what I went into in the slides, right? So why should you create documentation? It keeps your org healthy, but it's not quite as tasty as beer and pizza, right? So building documentation is a bit like eating vegetables. Everybody knows they should do it. Not everybody does it as often as they should, but it's definitely something that keeps an org healthy. And frankly, it keeps your career healthy. Knowing what you've done, being able to capture that and show that to prospective employers is super important. And I also wanted to include in here the bottom line here, the Barney line, purple dinosaur, sharing is caring, right? Sharing information with your colleagues, with future you, with your users is a way to demonstrate your commitment to your organization. So I've never met anybody ever who said, I wish that person wouldn't document quite as much. That doesn't happen. I'm waiting for the day that it does because I will hug that person. So let's go a little more in depth in this process here. So planning, right? Who's your audience and what do they know? Are they technical? Do you need to explain what a web browser is? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And it's the same sort of thing with our business expertise. If you say, you have to, submit your expense report line items for approval, do the folks who are reading the documentation know what that means, okay? So, what sort of knowledge do they need? What is the context? And how will they be looking for the information? This ties back to the format, which we'll get to in a second. So here's the proverbial blank screen of death, right? I'm looking at a blank screen. The cursor is blinking at me in the most taunting way possible. How do I get started writing? Starting with an outline. You'll notice here I started with an outline, adding screenshots with big red arrows. You'll notice my big red arrow. Adding videos. I don't have a video here. Sorry, guys. And then adding diagrams. See, I got my diagram over here. So trying to kind of show rather than just tell. So this is how this wiki came to be and how this presentation came to be was a text file on my desktop. Then revising. So this is kind of hard to show in a sexy way, but making sure that you're removing anything unnecessary, proofreading it again and having someone else proofread. It has to be crystal clear. If your documentation isn't clear, it's not truly documentation. You're trying to record, it's evidence of what has happened. And if it's not clear, folks won't consume it. And then publishing, are you gonna print it? Are you going to put it on the internet in the cloud? Are you going to put it in Salesforce? Are you going to make it mobile available? This wiki happens to be mobile available. If you want to type that long bit.ly URL into your web browser on your phone, you will see that it scrunches appropriately. It doesn't look fantastic, but it works. And so you can do some pretty sophisticated things now with that kind of responsiveness. So looking at who your consumer is, right? So are your users, your colleagues, partners, managers, subordinates, the folks who are downstream of Salesforce data. Again, you need to be clear on their technical ability. Do they understand what it means to log into a sandbox? Do they understand that they have to append the sandbox name, but that the login and password are the same? Those sorts of things. Making super clear with folks what they need to be doing. And then talking about the input and the main actor and the output of any process, they're going to need to consume documentation as well. There was a really cool quote about tone here. Don't make people feel stupid. Right? So being patient and kind and helping people move at their own pace, that's really an important point about documentation. Again, if people don't want to consume it, they won't, and you've wasted everybody's time. So be real clear, even if everyone else in the world is a jerk, you don't have to be, okay? So then how will it be consumed? Are folks going to be in front of their computers? Are they going to be on their phones? Are they going to be at their colleague's desk? Will they be in Salesforce when they need your documentation? Some folks do prefer paper. Giving them the option to print and have it next to them while they're working on their computer is often an option, depending upon how long they've been at their job and how tech savvy they are. So talking about format, right? So use cases, steps to complete, capturing who requested the functionality, capturing why they requested the functionality, that object that I made with, it felt like 87 checkboxes, it was probably only 20, was to manage a sales process. And at the time that I built it, it felt important to do it that way. And subsequently, field history tracking and doing things in a different way made sense. But who had requested it and why, I didn't have that information. So I had to go ask basically the entire management chain of a sales organization to figure out who I needed to get permission from to refactor this. So having captured that is super important, as well as date time of when it went live. Has this thing been live for 2 days or 3 years? So that I know how it can be consumed. And the tables and bullets and that sort of thing. When to document? All the time, every time, anytime there's a change, anytime there's new stuff, anytime there's a management decision, basically constantly. Documentation is a constant. We talked about where to put it. So let me show you this information in my dev org. So the tool config workbook is an AppExchange app that basically lets you dump out your org's metadata into a spreadsheet. And I've included those here, so you're welcome to go look at them. They're from a few months ago, but it's my dev org, so who cares? I took one of the sheets out of the spreadsheet and I put it in a page in this wiki. So I pulled out all the case fields. I tend to be a Service Cloud junkie, so I dumped these. And I've got the standard stuff you guys are used to seeing: field name, API name, data type, length, default value. But I added a column called why. Why did I create this custom field called case requester? Oh, I was doing a demo in January of 2013. Okay, well, all right, so why do I have client ID Amber and client ID Tiffany? Why do I have to, what am I doing here? Oh, I did a training in July of 2010. That was a while ago. Maybe those fields aren't useful anymore. Maybe I should delete them. If I didn't have this why, I would tend to keep them. I would tend to hoard fields. I would venture that a lot of you folks have hoarded fields in your org. I'm sure some of you are nodding, that nobody knows why they're there, but everybody's sure they're super important, but nobody knows who's putting data there, but they're crazy important. We can't delete them. So this is a great way to capture, why they're there, and this can be done kind of in a one-off fashion as you're creating things. So some further resources here. We've got some further links. These are the places where I pulled information for this presentation. Go take a look at those. I included a brief glossary. This isn't nearly as interesting as I had hoped it would be, but I figured I'd keep it because not every wiki page is interesting. And then this tools page has links to all the stuff we've talked about. So the config workbook AppExchange app, my buddy Gaurav did a blog post on taking the XML of your metadata and parsing it with OpenRefine. So go take a look at his blog post. It's stellar. Google Sites, how to get to those and what to do with them. Confluence, if your organization uses the other Atlassian products like Jira and that sort of thing, Confluence can be a part of that package and it's more robust than Google Sites. If you want to do some quick video recording, use Jing or Camtasia. Those are great ones. And then Screen Steps is a great way to create screenshots and step through how folks can interact with the thing you've built. And then the Salesforce toolkit has just a bunch of tools for comparing environments and deactivating workflows so that you can do bulk data loads and that sort of thing. So highly recommend that. There's some info about me. You're welcome to troll me on the internet. And then there's a site map here. This is created for me by Google Sites where I can move things around. You'll notice these are alphabetical, which is super not useful, but because of Google Sites, I can put these in the order that I want. And then there's also recent site activity. So this is a great way to see what has changed and when. A good wiki, and Google Sites doesn't do this, but Confluence does, you can not only see who changed the page, but what the old version looks like and what the new version looks like. So you can see changes over time. So as you add case fields, you would add a row to that table and add information or change information. And so with a good site activity report, you can see what changed and why. Think of it like field history tracking for your wiki. So please go take a look at it, poke around, ask questions, and let's jump back to the slides. All right, so getting started today, and you should get started today. Start gathering existing resources in one searchable place. If you've got them kind of all over, putting them in one place, ideally making them searchable, is super helpful. That config workbook to pull out your current metadata, great tool, highly recommend it. So go take a look at that. And start gathering the why of why changes are being made. Why do you need this new field? Maybe it's a new field that's needed for tracking a new KPI in Q2. That's important to have. And when you capture the fact that it's Q2, capture this to Q2 2016 because next year you'll look at that and go, Q2, what? Make sure you dedicate development time to keeping everything updated. That's super important as well, just because, again, you don't document once, you document, it's an ongoing thing. And part of that is deprecating old and inaccurate documentation. If something is no longer relevant, I recommend not deleting it, but marking it as deprecated and steering folks to the new, corrected, better way to do things. So get started today. So here are some more resources. So there's the link to the wiki, bit.ly/Amber says documentation. And then there's some more event stuff, but I'll let Mike talk about that because he knows way more about that than I do.
Thanks, Amber. So we covered a lot in a short amount of time, and there was a ton of questions. So I think the first kind of overall question, Amber, that I have for you is, can you tell me, you talked about documentation, and a lot of questions are coming in about training materials. Can you help me understand the difference between when I'm documenting my org in the metadata and creating training materials for users?
Yeah, they tend to go hand in hand. So, documenting the metadata of your org, the consumers of that are going to be more technical. They're going to be your colleagues, your nerdier folks, the IT people, the other people in sales and service ops. Training materials tend to be for your end users, the folks who are interacting with what you've built. They both need to be created and they both need to be maintained. So they're very similar and yet have distinct audiences.
Okay. And then there's a lot of questions. So you showed us one way that you documented what you created, which was with a Google site. And Salesforce has knowledge articles, and they also have help and training links. Like, are there other options out there besides a Google site that we could use to create our documentation?
Sure, absolutely. Frankly, there is no bad way to do documentation. There are better ways, but there are no bad ways. So if it works for you to use, solutions and cases and knowledge and a chatter group, by all means do that. My call to action for you guys is to start documentation today. Think about it, plan about it, get going. Because again, it's awesome. It's one of those things where it's part of the process. But to your point, Mike, there are ways to capture information in Salesforce, and if that's where your users are, if that's where they're using things, absolutely, that's a great place to do it.
And then last question. Things are changing quickly. Salesforce has 3 releases a year, and that's on top of any other config changes that an admin could be making. What is your advice on, keeping documentation up to date when you're rapidly developing?
It's got to be a part of the process. If you are part of especially if you're a solo admin, but if you're part of an organization that's changing that rapidly, I would argue you need to spend an hour a week and just dedicate that time, block it off on your calendar, and just know that that's going to be time that you're going to spend. That's part of being a good administrator, frankly. It's part of keeping things up to date. So yeah, it just has to be part of your process.
Great. I just want to remind everybody, if you still have questions that we didn't get to, you can go to bit.ly/admin webinar group. It's called Salesforce Admins Webinar on the Success Community, and ask your question there, and Amber, I will jump in. Thanks for joining us today.